The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the Double J Ranch, where Jacob Mackenzie had lived alone for 15 years. His weathered hands gripped the porch rail as he watched the empty horizon, the same ritual he'd performed every dawn since Margaret and little Emma had been taken by the fever. The silence of the ranch house behind him felt heavier than the humid Texas air. At 52, Jacob's once broad shoulders had begun to stoop under the weight of solitude. His dark hair, now streaked with silver, hung unkempt beneath his worn Stetson. The lines around his gray eyes spoke of too many sunrises spent in mourning, too many evenings with only his horse Thunder for company. The ranch that had once echoed with his daughter's laughter now seemed to mock him with its emptiness. He'd built this place with his own two hands, dreaming of generations of Mackenzies who would work this land. Those dreams had died with Margaret's final breath, buried alongside his wife and daughter in the small cemetery beyond the oak grove. Now the ranch felt more like a prison than a home, its vast acreage a reminder of everything he'd lost. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through his morning reverie. Jacob's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 on his hip. Visitors were rare in these parts and rarely brought good news. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward the ranch house. As the figure drew closer, Jacob could make out the distinctive silhouette of a woman, her long black hair flowing behind her as she rode. The woman rode with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle, her buckskin dress and beaded accessories marking her as one of the local Comanche. Jacob had traded with her people before, always fair dealings conducted in respectful silence. But this woman rode with urgency, her horse lathered with sweat from hard travel. She reined in her paint mare at the base of the porch steps, her dark eyes meeting Jacob's with an intensity that made him straighten. "You are Jacob Mackenzie?" she asked, her English clear but accented with the musical tones of her native tongue. "I am," he replied, his voice rusty from disuse, "though I can't say I know you, ma'am." "I am Ayanna of the Comanche. I have traveled 3 days to find you." She dismounted gracefully, her movements fluid despite the obvious exhaustion in her posture. "I bring children who need a home, orphans like you once were." Jacob's heart clenched at the unexpected words. How could she know about his own childhood in the Boston orphanage? He'd never spoken of those years to anyone, not even Margaret. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. Ayanna's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "The wind carries stories, Jacob Mackenzie. It tells of a boy who grew up without parents, who built a life from nothing, who loved deeply and lost everything. It tells of a man who has forgotten how to live." "You don't know anything about me," Jacob's voice hardened. But even as he spoke, he could hear the hollow ring of his own words. The truth was, he'd been slowly dying inside for 15 years, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. "I know you have space in your heart and your home," Ayanna continued, undeterred by his defensive tone. "I know that 3 children sleep cold tonight because they have nowhere else to go. Their parents died in the winter sickness. The tribe cannot care for them. We have too many mouths to feed and too little food." Jacob's resolve wavered as he thought of children facing the same fate he'd known as a boy. The memory of cold orphanage dormitories and empty bellies rose unbidden in his mind. "Why bring them to me? There are towns with proper families." "Because you understand what it means to be alone," Ayanna interrupted, "and because the spirits have shown me that you are the one who can save them, all of them, including yourself." The weight of her words settled over Jacob like a heavy blanket. He wanted to refuse, to send her away and return to his familiar solitude. But something in her eyes, a combination of desperation and certainty, made him hesitate. Where are these children now? Hidden in the canyon 2 miles north. They are afraid of being turned away again, afraid of trusting another white man who might abandon them. Ayana's voice carried the pain of someone who'd seen too much suffering. The eldest is 12, the youngest barely 4. They have been traveling for weeks, looking for someone who might care. Jacob felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. 12 years old, the same age he'd been when he'd run away from the orphanage, determined to make his own way in the world. 4 years old, younger than Emma had been when she died. What are their names? The boy is called Tommy, though his birth name stands with courage. The older girl is Sarah, born as Singing Bird. The little one is called Lily. Her true name is Small Flower. Ayana watched Jacob's face carefully as she spoke. They are good children, Mr. Mackenzie. They have known sorrow, but they have not let it make them bitter. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache in his chest that came with thoughts of children. For 15 years, he'd avoided the very idea of caring for anyone else, terrified of experiencing that kind of loss again. But now, faced with the reality of 3 orphaned children, he felt something stirring inside him that he'd thought was dead, the desire to protect, to provide, to be needed. "I can't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't know how to care for children anymore. I've been alone too long." Ayana stepped closer, her expression gentle but determined. "The earth knows how to bloom again after the harshest winter, Jacob Mackenzie. Hearts, too, can learn to grow again." These children need more than shelter. They need someone who understands their pain, who can teach them that love is worth the risk of loss. The morning sun climbed higher, casting the ranch in golden light that seemed to emphasize its emptiness. Jacob looked across the land he'd worked for decades, seeing it suddenly through different eyes. The barn that could house children's laughter. The fields that could teach young hands the satisfaction of honest work. The house that could once again be a home. "If I say yes," he said slowly, "what happens then? I don't know anything about raising children, especially—" He gestured helplessly, unable to find the right words. "Especially not Indian children?" Ayana's tone was matter-of-fact, without accusation. "They are children first, Mr. Mackenzie. They need food, shelter, kindness, and someone who will not abandon them when times grow hard. Can you provide these things?" Jacob thought of all the nights he'd sat alone in his empty house, listening to the wind howl through the eaves. He thought of the meals he'd eaten in silence, the conversations he'd had only with his horse, the slow erosion of his humanity through years of isolation. Maybe Ayana was right. Maybe he needed these children as much as they needed him. "Bring them," he said quietly, surprised by his own words. "Bring them home." Ayana's relief was visible as she mounted her horse. "I will return before sunset with the children. They will be frightened, Mr. Mackenzie. They have been disappointed before by promises that were not kept." Jacob nodded, already beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd agreed to. As Ayana rode away, he stood on his porch, surveying his ranch with new eyes. The house would need work. The spare bedrooms had been closed off for years, their windows boarded up to keep out the wind and memories. He'd need supplies, food, clothes. 3 children would transform everything about his carefully ordered solitude. He spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of activity that felt foreign after years of mechanical routine. The first bedroom he opened had been Emma's, and the sight of her small bed and scattered toys nearly broke his resolve. But he forced himself to continue, cleaning and preparing spaces that had gathered dust for 15 years. Margaret's sewing room could house the two girls, and Emma's room would be perfect for the youngest. By the time he saw riders approaching on the horizon, Jacob had worked up a sweat and a powerful case of nerves. 3 small figures sat on horses beside Ayanna, and even from a distance he could see their tension in the way they held themselves. They rode like children who had learned not to hope too much, not to expect too much kindness from the world. The boy, Tommy, was indeed about 12. His dark hair braided in the traditional way, but his clothes a mixture of buckskin and worn white man's clothing. He sat his horse with the pride of someone trying to be braver than he felt. The older girl, Sarah, looked to be about 10, her large eyes taking in every detail of the ranch with the careful observation of a child who had learned to assess danger quickly. The smallest, Lily, rode double with Ayanna, her thumb in her mouth and her free hand clutching a worn cloth doll. "Children," Ayanna said as they dismounted, "this is Jacob Mackenzie. He has agreed to let you stay here, to give you a home." Tommy stepped forward, his chin raised in defiance or courage. Jacob couldn't tell which. "Why?" the boy asked in clear English. "Why would you want us?" The question cut straight to Jacob's heart. He knelt down to bring himself to the children's eye level, remembering how intimidating adults had seemed when he was their age. "Because," he said carefully, "I know what it's like to be alone. I know what it's like to need someone to care about you. And maybe I need someone to care about too." Sarah moved protectively closer to little Lily, her expression skeptical. "What if you change your mind? What if you decide you don't want us anymore?" Jacob felt the weight of their distrust, understanding it completely. How many times had he himself been disappointed by adults who'd made promises they couldn't keep? "I won't lie to you," he said. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to take care of children. But I promise you this, I will never abandon you. This will be your home for as long as you need it." Lily had been silent through the exchange, but now she stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of a 4-year-old. "Are you sad?" she asked, her small voice barely above a whisper. The question caught Jacob off guard. He looked into her dark eyes, seeing a wisdom that seemed far too old for her years. "Yes," he admitted, "I have been sad for a very long time." "Me too," Lily said simply. And then, to his amazement, she reached out and took his hand. Her small fingers were warm and slightly sticky, and Jacob felt something inside his chest crack open at the simple contact. Ayanna watched the exchange with satisfaction. "The children have few possessions," she said, "but they have much love to give, if you are willing to receive it." Over the following days, Jacob learned that caring for 3 children was like trying to tend a wildfire, unpredictable, exhausting, and utterly consuming. Tommy proved to be serious beyond his years, taking on responsibilities around the ranch with the grim determination of someone who'd learned not to be a burden. Sarah was cautious but curious, helping with cooking and cleaning while keeping a protective eye on her younger sister. Lily was pure energy, getting into everything with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been starved for stability and attention. The first week was a disaster. Jacob burned breakfast, forgot to buy milk, and had no idea how to braid Sarah's hair or answer Lily's endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to where babies came from. Tommy tried to help, but was clearly struggling with his own grief and the responsibility he felt for his younger companions. "This isn't working," Jacob muttered to himself one evening as he surveyed the chaos of his once orderly home. Dishes were piled in the sink, laundry was scattered across every surface, and something sticky had been spilled on the kitchen floor. The children were in bed, but he could hear Sarah crying quietly in the next room, homesick for the only life she'd ever known. But then he heard another sound, Tommy's voice, soft and gentle, singing a Comanche lullaby to comfort Sarah. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with sadness, but also with hope. Jacob found himself standing outside their door, listening to the boy's young voice carry his sister through her pain. The next morning, Jacob made a decision. Instead of trying to force the children to fit into his existing life, he would learn to build a new life that had room for all of them. He asked Tommy to teach him about Comanche traditions, asked Sarah to help him understand what foods the children preferred, asked Lily to show him how to play the simple games that made her laugh. Slowly, gradually, the ranch began to transform. The house filled with the sounds of children, laughter, arguments, the patter of small feet on wooden floors. Jacob found himself remembering how to smile, how to tell stories, how to comfort a child's nightmare. The children, in turn, began to trust him, to seek his approval, to include him in their games and conversations. Tommy proved to be a natural horseman and took to ranch work with enthusiasm. Sarah discovered a talent for cooking and insisted on helping with every meal. Lily appointed herself as Jacob's constant companion, following him around the ranch and chattering about everything she saw. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Sarah braiding Lily's hair by the fire. Tommy teaching Jacob a few words in Comanche. All of them gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories of their day. For the first time in 15 years, Jacob's house felt like a home. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. The children still woke with nightmares, still flinched at loud noises, still tested the boundaries of Jacob's patience and commitment. There were days when Tommy's anger at the world erupted in defiance. Days when Sarah retreated into silent withdrawal. Days when Lily's need for attention seemed bottomless. But Jacob was learning too. Learning that love wasn't just about the easy moments, but about showing up consistently, especially when things were difficult. He was learning that being a father meant being present, being patient, being willing to fail and try again. 3 months after the children's arrival, Jacob stood on his porch watching Tommy teach Sarah how to rope a fence post. The boy had patience and skill beyond his years, and Sarah was determined to master the technique. Lily sat nearby, fashioning dolls from corn husks and chattering to herself in the mixture of English and Comanche that had become her trademark. The transformation in all of them was remarkable. The children had gained weight, their eyes had lost that haunted look of constant vigilance, and they'd begun to laugh with genuine joy. Tommy had grown 2 inches and was starting to develop the confident bearing of a young man. Sarah had become more outspoken, her natural intelligence shining through as she devoured every book in Jacob's small library. Lily had blossomed into a precocious 4-year-old who ruled the ranch with her infectious giggle and boundless energy. But it was the change in Jacob himself that was most profound. The man who had spent 15 years slowly dying inside had found reasons to live again. His laugh came easier now, his shoulders had straightened, and the bitter lines around his eyes had softened into something approaching contentment. "Mr. Jacob," Lily called out, running toward him with a cornhusk doll clutched in her small hands. "Look what I made! It's you!" Jacob examined the doll solemnly, noting its button eyes and yarn hair. "It's very handsome," he said seriously, "though I think you made me taller than I really am." "That's 'cause you're big in my heart," Lily said with the casual wisdom of childhood. And Jacob felt his chest tighten with emotion he still wasn't entirely comfortable expressing. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table sharing their usual end-of-day stories, Sarah looked up from her plate with an expression of unusual seriousness. "Mr. Jacob," she said, "Tommy and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something." Jacob set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" "We were wondering, that is, we wanted to know." Sarah struggled with the words, looking to Tommy for support. Tommy took over, his voice steady, but his hands fidgeting with his napkin. "We want to know if we can call you Papa. If you want us to, I mean. We know you're not our real father, but—" "But you feel like our Papa," Lily interrupted, climbing onto Jacob's lap with the confidence of a child who knew she was welcome there. "Don't you want to be our Papa?" Jacob looked around the table at the three faces watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. These children who had been strangers just months ago, who had transformed his empty house into a home, who had taught him that his heart was capable of healing. "I would be honored," he said quietly, "to be your Papa, if you're sure that's what you want." "We're sure," Sarah said, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "We've been sure for weeks." The formal adoption process took several more months, involving trips to town, meetings with territorial officials, and a great deal of paperwork. But to Jacob and the children, the real adoption had taken place much earlier, in the thousand small moments of daily life, in the gradual building of trust and love, in the recognition that they had chosen each other. The ranch continued to prosper under their combined efforts. Tommy proved to have a natural head for business and convinced Jacob to expand their cattle operation. Sarah's careful record-keeping and budgeting skills helped them plan for the future. Even Lily contributed, her sunny disposition making their frequent trips to town more pleasant as she charmed everyone they met. But it was the personal growth in each of them that mattered most. Jacob had learned that loving someone always involved the risk of loss, but that the alternative, a life without love, was far worse. Tommy had discovered that being strong didn't mean carrying every burden alone. Sarah had learned that trust, carefully given, could be rewarded with genuine care. Lily had simply learned that she was safe, loved, and wanted. One evening, as Jacob tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with her serious dark eyes. "Papa," she said, "are you still sad?" Jacob considered the question carefully. He would always miss Margaret and Emma. Their memory was part of who he was now. But the sharp, constant ache of grief had softened into something more manageable, something that coexisted with joy rather than consuming it. "Sometimes," he said, honestly, "but I'm happy too. Happier than I've been in a very long time." "Good," Lily said with satisfaction, "because we need you to be happy. We need you to be our Papa." "I need you too," Jacob replied, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. "All of you. You saved me, you know, just as much as I saved you." As he made his rounds through the house, checking on Tommy and Sarah, Jacob reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. He'd thought his story was over, that he was destined to live out his days as a bitter, lonely man haunted by loss. Instead, he'd discovered that it was possible to build a new story, one that honored the past while embracing the future. The ranch that had once been a monument to his solitude now rang with the sounds of a family, arguments and laughter, plans and dreams, the daily negotiations of people who had chosen to love each other despite the risks. The empty rooms had been filled with life. The silent meals had become animated conversations, and the lonely man had become a father. Standing on his porch one final time before bed, Jacob looked out over the land he'd worked for decades. The same moon that had witnessed his years of grief now shone down on a transformed life. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the cattle moving restlessly in the night, Tommy's horse nickering softly in the barn, the gentle sounds of a working ranch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to prove that love was stronger than loss, that hope could grow in the most unlikely places, that family was something you chose as much as something you were born into. The heartbroken rancher who had lived alone for 15 years had discovered that the heart's capacity for healing was as vast as the Texas sky above him. In the end, it wasn't the native woman who had brought him the children, it was the children who had brought him back to life. And in saving them, he had found the strength to save himself.